Hello and good afternoon. So a very warm welcome to this session on Manavutsav. Today we are going to discuss a much debated area, and of course we are going to also look into how we can basically produce a counter narrative on on ageism. And to the session is named as Battling Ageism and the Critical Stance in Media. And we have got with us, joining us today in the studio, Dr. Debanjan Banerjee, who is a Geriatric Psychiatrist at NIMHANS, Bangalore. So I'm going to invite him in the studio now. And a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Banerjee. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thanks, Dr. Lahiri. Thank you for having me, in this, and congratulations for all the other programs that Manavutsav hosts. I think they're very relevant and a learning for all of us.
Thank you very much. It is real pleasure to have you today, and I think that you had a busy day already. And finding some time for us this evening is really really helpful for our audience as well. So before we start the discussion, I would like to show some screenshots. So it's. So we have been coming across in the media, and there have been not much writing around how ageism is portrayed in the media. However, there have been some research which has been conducted, and this is really a screenshot that I have taken from one of the researchers, which basically highlighted the ageist phrases that's been used time and again, whether they be in the media or they be in the workplace. And I think I thought that this is going to be a good one to start the conversation with, discussions around retirement, discussions around what you can do and cannot do as you progress with age. So, what are the opening question is very much around what are the common things around ageism or common narratives, and how can that impact our society?
Yeah, Dr. Diary, thanks first for choosing such a pertinent topic to discuss today. As a old age psychiatrist, I must say that ageism is not only a neglected uh, area, probably in let's say in a common academic discourse, but also in research, and that is what makes ageism so
Having some technical issues, we've lost Dr. Banerjee there. Can you hear us? Okay, so what we will do, when Dr. Banerjee comes back and the technical issue is resolved, we will, of course, continue the conversation. In between, what we would like to do is to kind of, play some of the videos that we have, and we can see, how ageism is portrayed in the media, or how, when you are encountering different phrases around ageism, how does that impact our mental health and mental wellness? And one of the current campaigns going around that is by yes. So we have got Dr. Banerjee back.
yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
And that's fine. I was just saying that maybe we can just play a short video, but that's fine. So you entered at the perfect time.
Okay. Right. I'm it's okay, right? I'm audible and visible now.
Yes. Yeah. You are.
Right. I'm so sorry for, there's
No,
been a
that's
net
fine. That's fine.
disruption.
Yeah. No.
That's been a new normal for us now post-COVID.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, I was mentioning that ageism has been kind of an all-pervasive thing in a society. So in fact, this year, the World Health Organization has released its global report on ageism, which is a very important document. It's free to download in the WHO website. And it does mention that, almost 50% of the global, population, they have some sort of ageist thoughts at some time or the other. And uh, sometimes it is very covert. Sometimes it's not that always ageism has to be, uh, it's something related specifically to the seniors, because any form of age related disruption in our thinking, or how we behave, that's ageism. uh, Usually it's how we think, that is, what are our stereotypes, to how we feel about age related problems, that's the prejudice, to finally how we act based on these attitudes, that is, the discrimination that ultimately happens in the society. But mostly the senior population, they are the victims of these ageist stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. And especially during the pandemic, and time and again we have discussed this, is that it's not always very overt. So sometimes we all have seniors in our house, and our families. So sometimes we have restricted their freedom for their own good, which is, of course, sometimes needed, because a particular age is more vulnerable to the virus. But then what has happened is they were not involved in the decision making. Their autonomy was compromised, and that's also a type of, an offshoot of ageism in our society. So the common narratives of ageism arise from all classes of society, from all sectors of socioeconomic strata, and most importantly, I think it's the very basis of a fear of aging, a fear of death, a fear of the process of aging. Uh, Kind of in our minds, we all equate being old with something which is decaying, something which is withering, something which is probably going near to perishing. And that leads to this fear of age and fear of being old, which forms the basis of this ingrained ageist thoughts in our mind. And there is no one edge to it. So we all have been uh, harboring this. We all have thought about this, even sometimes in healthcare. And uh, funny enough, we all will be even victims of this at some time or the other.
I think that's really a very interesting sort of area that you brought in, because of course, I mean, we will all have to go through this process, and as you said, and this is kind of a, I think it's more kind of that narrative where we speak to a child. When we talk to them, we say, well, you're going to grow up, and then you're going to face that situation, and so we try and reinforce some of the ideas and thoughts that we have. However, what we can see also is that there are kind of ageist stereotypes or ageist phrases that's being used in a very normalized way in the media. And when I say media, I'm talking about newspapers, I'm talking about adverts, I'm talking about movies and radio. So, and also that has impacted how we look at people in our workplaces as well. And I think that kind of has an impact. And so how do you think ageism is promoted? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I think, Dr. Lahiri, you are from the media background, so you will really be able to appreciate this well. And when we really talk about media, that's kind of a reflection of what what popular thoughts are there in the society, and that's kind of reflecting back on us as to what we think. So a very important fact is, when we talk about the media, the mass media, particularly televisions and movies, they kind of define social roles in our contemporary culture by presenting a steady, a constant, and a repetitive portrayal of images, and messages. So there have been many studies. In fact, a particular section of this World Health Organization report has been dedicated to media and ageism. And there have been studies which have shown that, how a person ages, or the process of aging, has been automatically portrayed as a very stereotyped feature of, which is against youth, against beauty, anti-life, and it's very reductionistic, the best to say, because right now a major paradigm shift in our thinking of how a person ages has been the positive dimension of it. Yeah, of course. I mean, when you age, there are different kind of frailty sets in. There are different changes that happens in your body, your mind, physiological changes. But then you also gain wisdom, experience. You tend to become more resilient, and it's different. So let's say somebody who's above 50, or somebody who is the old, above 70, they may also have their own needs of motivation, their own interests, their own ways of enjoying life, uh, their own you know own fantasies, own wishes, and understandings about sexuality and relationships. But automatically, being old is equated with somebody being senior and being deprived of many of these. The other concern is, of course, underrepresentation. So there have been research and surveys which have shown that in popular media, both in the east and the west, the population above 60 years, and now for every single connotation, it's better we use older people, because that is the agreed World Health Organization term, rather than calling them elderly, seniors, or something else. So, they're usually shown as feeble, forgetful, stubborn, I know it all types, helpless. And these negative stereotypes are not limited to just probably movies. It's there in commercials, advertisements, short films, documentaries, and even, in our digital media and print media. So when we have gone back, part of our work has been when we have discussed as to how the older people perceive this. Many times they have felt that, everything that is portrayed related to aging is not just about somebody who needs shelter, somebody who needs protection, somebody who is weak, frail, vulnerable, but also the other aspects of aging, the positive aspects of aging is not brought. So either it is portrayal of a negative stereotype, which is an act of commission, in terms of ageist portrayals, or it's also an act of omission. You do not portray this other parts of the aging process, which brings with it the happiness, the togetherness, the resilience, but rather selectively only portray the areas which probably will not only make the consumers, they will that will reinforce their ageist thinking. But let's say somebody who is an older adult who is seeing that, a particular portrayal in a movie or on an ad, that person, the self stigma, the self ageism, many times the stigma that we have towards older persons also is imbibed by the person themselves at a particular age. So that self stigma also tends to perpetuate, and that is probably the most harmful effect of the media portrayals of ageism.
That's fantastic. Yes, and actually, when you're talking about the media portrayal of ageism, there is sometimes it's been linked as older adults as a burden to the society. So they always need help, like you were saying, that they're not vulnerable in all possible sense, like media portrays, but they might need help. We all need help. It's not linked to age. And I would like to play a video at this stage, if you're okay, because it kind of portrays a counter narrative on just saying no to ageist comments.
People think you can't do things after a certain age or at a certain age. Prove them wrong by just doing it. I ran an ultramarathon when I was 51.
We run an online business together.
Doesn't matter your age, it matters how much energy you put into something.
I'm 28 years old and I'm running for office.
I got a tattoo at the age of 51. Makes me feel like a rock star. It's about how you feel and your outlook on life. It doesn't matter how old you are.
And this is quite you can see why I brought it at this stage when you are actually talking about it, which kind of connects me to the next question possibly I'm going to ask you as well, regarding the differences, how ageism is portrayed. Like you were saying, the point you were making, that in the East and in the West, there are different ways through which it's portrayed in the media. You know, sometimes you are expected to be in a care home to be cared better rather than with the family, and then, you know, in some places it's more about, okay, you don't understand what I'm saying, and it's because of the generational gap. So there are different kinds of narratives being talked about, but also portrayed in the films. How do you think is that difference? How stark are those differences actually?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that in the video, you know, they showed that it's not just limited to the seniors. It's both that you are too old versus you are too young. And yeah, so as I said, ageism can be all pervasive. It can move across the entire spectrum. And ironically, there is no one cutoff that, you know, ageism either starts below this age or, you know, above a particular age. It's very relative. In fact, when you asked me this question, it suddenly, you know, I was recalling that, in fact, what we are discussing now, the portrayal of ageism in media, or, you know, in any medium, it's specifically referred to as visual ageism. Now, this is a term that was coined by Ivan in 2018. And specifically with relation to media, it's termed as the social practice of visually underrepresenting older people. So that is one aspect of it, or misrepresenting them in a prejudiced way. So when I tell both these dimensions, you know, I think underrepresentation is uniform both in the East and the West, and misrepresentation is probably, I would say, more in the West, because even though there is no one line that can demarcate the East-West media in today's date, but if you really follow up the productions or the movies that so-called has come out from the, let's say, you know, I'm speaking from India, so let's say Bollywood versus Hollywood, or, you know, even documentaries or adverts, in it also depends on the difference in family dynamics, the family representations, or the family systems. So it's more of the individualistic system of the West versus the collectivistic family system of the East. But now that's not uniform. You know, so as I said, in East, if you see the different movies that portray, you know, so-called ageist or age-based narratives. So mostly a person above 50 or 60 years is shown to be someone who has, you know, kind of completed everything, probably doesn't need or doesn't desire for earthly pleasures anymore. Somebody who is kind of renounced everything and has gone back to the one age of life. Now, the only he or she looks forward to the children or the family to take care of him or her, and the only possible, let's say, a good goal, quote unquote, for the person may be having a peaceful death. And you know, there was a concept called golden years, but that golden years concept is gradually missing now. Now, there is something called, I'm sure you'll be aware of this, that there is this third age rhetoric, you know, that in media. So it's based on picturing older people as healthy and as potential consumers who enjoy life and live their golden years. So it's like add life to your years rather than adding years to your life. That's a changing narrative. But if you see over the time, both in West and the East, you will see that representations of older people have moved from visual under and misrepresentations, that are negative images, to, of course, more positive depictions. So sometimes the solo life of somebody, it's not just to fulfill the other person's need, but to fulfill his or her own aspirations. And very recently, The Father was released, and it got the Oscar. Even though it was related to the life and living with dementia, it has beautifully portrayed how a person, even as the process of decay of the brain is associated, but still how the person kind of continues to have his autonomy and free independent living decision making, even when the possibly he is not in the best of the shape. And I think these days visual ageism in the media tends to kind of it's more of wrapped in the guise of positive attributes of third age representations of older people. So sometimes in our attempt to counter ageism, we kind of actually promote self-ageism, and that is also something which we should be mindful of, because many movies or advertisements of the Western media has now kind of showed an independent living of the seniors. Now, that is not to mention that they do not need care, or the institutionalization or independent caregiving facilities should be promoted rather than being with the family. But there needs to strike a delicate balance between understanding that preventing ageism is not preventing your seniors from receiving the support that they need or the support that they deserve, but seeing to it so that with the required support, they can have an independent, autonomous, respectful quality of life without any other inequality or lack of dignity. And we are discussing these things at a very good time, because within a month, within a couple of months, the 1st October is the International Day of Older Persons. And I think the different global organizations who work in the mental health of older people, they have come together and now started asking that why do we really need to ask for a separate dignity, or a separate human rights for older people? Because if you just consider fundamental human rights, right to live with respect, with equal access to health care, and with dignity, is a basic right, and that's fundamentally against ageism. But the problem is that what is media? It's a self-reflection of what we are, what we are discussing today. Until these stereotypes do not move out from our regular discourse and discussion, let's say we are having a coffee together and I see somebody and I pass a comment, the comment that you just showed at the beginning of the show. So if that continues, irrespective of n number of researchers and no matter how much we discuss and how many global reports come out, the imbibed ageism in society is not going to move out. We are not will not be able to move out of it.
Thank you. And do you think that that imbibed sort of stereotyping within the society, I mean, how will that be possible to counter that? Is it more because it's more kind of media produced narrative that then percolates within the society and in our thoughts, in our understanding, and we start to grow with it, isn't it? So it's kind of it's a very difficult area to kind of discuss, because you can't propose to have your own media channel to combat ageism, comments and stereotyping and all of that. But what we can do is to produce a counter narrative. Now, what do you think will be the most effective ways of producing that counter narrative or building that literacy around ageism?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Lyrie, the most important thing is what you just mentioned. It's about literacy. And there is the concept of media literacy. In fact, it's coincidental that we are having this discussion today, and the coronavirus and international media is also supposed to be released today.
Today.
And yeah, and if you remember the work that we had on kind of the discourse in the UK and the Indian media, we also did mention about how stigmatizing a normal behavior or stigmatizing a popular public perception can go in either ways. Now I have always considered, a few days back there was a lot of discussion about media portrayal of suicide, you know especially after there was an alleged Indian celebrity suicide, I think in 2020. Now, every single time we have this discussion, I am always strongly of this opinion that media is an extremely influential and powerful tool. And for this, as you rightly said, we do not need to have new channels of media, but rather we just need to optimize the existing channels. Now, I'm sure that uh, a lot of directors, a lot of producers, a lot of companies who kind of want to portray the messages, they do not really want to intend a harm. But as I said, sometimes ageism becomes extremely covert. It's not always an overt ageism. So the first step will, of course, be media literacy. There needs to be a constructive and a coordinated dialogue between media professionals and people who work with the older population at different levels of uh, healthcare and social welfare. It can be the social worker, the healthcare worker, the geriatrician, the geriatric psychiatrist, the policy makers, and every stakeholder involved. And most importantly, the senior citizens, the older people themselves. So mostly when you see that these policies or these guidelines come out, a group of individuals sit and decide what will be better for, let's say, people who are above 60. But I think it's very important to include their voices as well. Let's say if today I'm a 70-year-old gentleman who wants to consume certain aspects of media, how would I want my representation to be? And I think that's a wonderful area of research. In fact, there have been studies which have recently looked at, as I was mentioning, as to how different age groups, let's say 40 to 50, 50 to 60, how they really view these representations. So is it in sync with what they think, or is it in discordance, and which areas are in discordance? And it also depends on the cultural thinking as to how you have been how you have dealt with the older people in your life, and the family bonds and the intergenerational bonds. And this is what brings us to the second most important part of it, that if we have to fight ageism, now a person uh, starts to age right from the time he or she comes out of the womb. So the day one of birth, it's not that I turn 50 and then I start aging. So if I have to change the thinking patterns of how a person uh, views or perceives aging to be, or the process of aging to be, I think we have to start fairly early. And all over, intergenerational bonds improvement, improving the family ties, improving how my relationship with my parents and my grandparents are when I am at school, and then when I am a teenager, and through the adolescence to when I turn adult, has a lot to do when the life cycle is reversed. So when I am in the role of a grandparent. So I think understanding what ageism is, fighting ageism, appreciating the process of aging, creating counter narratives to this age-old fear of death needs to start right when a person is being educated from the school days, be it at home or be it in the school. And so we should be very careful in choosing the content that we are putting in the curriculum, let's say for class 10, class 12, junior school, mid school, high school, all throughout. Sometimes a picture, a story, a short story in a book may have a very casual comment about, somebody who is very weak, frail, vulnerable, which is well enough. But then the person who is narrating that story, or the teacher who is discussing it, should also portray that this is one side of it. Every single person in your life whom you see as old is not by default weak or frail. Apparently, it sounds very simple, isn't it? Like, how can just a casual discussion over a college club or a coffee, or how can a simple story in a book when you were probably in your school impact your thoughts? But then that's what stays, and that's what kind of continues perpetuating in the society. Because when we talk about community, society, families, media at a broader scale, even policy, who makes them? We make them. It's made up of people. So it all depends on how we start thinking. And beyond everything, irrespective of our profession, if we are a doctor, not even, you're a media professional, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to us today, irrespective of which part of the society you are, what you work as, I think it's a collective responsibility for all of us to take this forward, to prevent being ageist at any level of age, and to promote healthy aging. And that's the last thing that I would say, that if you kind of practice a healthy aging process and promote it, and by that I mean aging at every single age. It can be 20s to 30s, late 50s, above 80-year-old. So if you promote healthy aging, if you start thinking about aging as a process which not only leads to improvement in your understanding of uh, the world, but also it leads to gaining wisdom, resilience, and developing unique needs. It's just different. It's not it's that no, it's not that you lose everything and you are totally dependent on others. So probably if we can shift our thinking from equating aging as something which is a dependent, which is a frail, which is a weak process, to something which is a dignified, related to wisdom, related to positive parts of it, and most importantly, related to being integrated in the family with new needs, new thoughts, and new ideals, then probably we can really be able to combat ageism. But then it's a multi-systemic, multi-level process, and not even though each one of us are responsible, uh, it needs to happen at every single different level. And it involves school, it involves places of education, places of gathering, and any form of academic discourse, research papers, movie, media, how we write, how we talk about it, everything. So probably only then it will work.
Yeah, I think that's, yes. I mean, you're right in saying that, because we were kind of having this discussion when I think last year at some point we were thinking about talking to the schools around mental wellness and building resilience, and to kind of embed that in the curriculum. So during the coronavirus, like when the virus came actually last year, and we were in a very, very difficult sort of situation, I think possibly that's when we started learning that how important it is to kind of build resilience within the curriculum and to talk about mental wellness. And I think that a lot of destigmatization actually happened during the last 1 year when the virus started. And I think as you might also agree that whenever the natural disasters happen, of course there are negatives in their own life. However, that also brings some positive discussions, and it kind of opens the door. And it's that kind of discussion that we want to pursue, but also want to take in. And ageism is possibly one of that, because as you were saying, that some of the discussions, I would like to give you an example of that, is that, when you are aging, like you said, aging is a process. When you move from 20s to 30s, you kind of start thinking about what you can do and what you cannot do, what is expected because you are 20, what is expected because you are 30. And these expectations are, again, very much fed by the media, and very much fed by what they have read, how they have discussed the process of ageism in their family, and all of those thoughts. And if we are to counter that narrative, definitely embedding that within the curriculum, of course, that's a different set of discussion that can also happen, that how we can actually bring that in. But actually knowing your body better and to understand the whole life cycle of a human being is something that needs to be emphasized a lot, not just as just as a tool at the beginning to kind of say, well, this is a skeleton and this is where your organs are, but rather it is in sync. The mental health and the physical health is in sync. And also the mindset. I don't know what you think about that. So I think setting that mindset, as we were saying, as you were also possibly hinting there, that to develop that mindset is kind of difficult. And without the curriculum, we're not able to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the mindset depends on a lot of factors. As you rightly said, curriculum is a part of it, because what we think and what we imbibe in our thoughts, a lot is dependent on our education. And we do spend a significant amount of time in our schools, colleges, so not only related to ageism, but anything, I mean, any particular public perceptions, or to put it very broadly, let's say what we think about mental health, or what we think about mental health disorders, because that's again an area which significant stigma is involved. So how we think about it or how we discuss about it depends on how we have been perceiving it from a long time. Today, when you meet, say, somebody who is around 50, 55, and that person himself or herself also feels that because I have turned this particular age, I, for me to talk about, let's say, something hedonic, or to talk about my own sexual needs, or to talk about my relationship issues, is something which is forbidden. Now, that comes from an area where probably that person has traversed his or her own lifestyle in a way that age has been equated only with renouncement. That is, you only have to give, you have to sacrifice, you have to leave certain things, and you are expected to live in a particular way. And as I was mentioning, this mindset, or if we have to work with ageism, we cannot confine ourselves only to a patient population, because, see, being in a tertiary care institute, when we basically discuss things with people who meet us, we are catering to the tip of the iceberg. So educational settings, schools, colleges, healthcare, social welfare systems, policymakers, workplace, media, legal representations, in institutionalized settings, be it custodial settings, hospitals, old age homes, halfway homes or care homes, everywhere this needs to be there. And I think many times when we have spoken to people who are in old age home setup, or who are in administrative services there, many times after discussing with us, they have said that, there are so many things that we end up doing, which now retrospectively, when we think back, we think that may be ageist, but it has never really struck us, because again, discrimination is a pattern of behavior, and when it happens repetitively, it kind of becomes a habit, and it's all about unlearning, rather than learning new things. And that probably comes from the fact, as I said time and again, that ageism originates because of our innate fear of death. None of us are willing to die, and that's a basic human instinct. It's a living instinct. And because death is always considered to be something senile, so the very process of aging is equated with something which you want to avoid, something which is anti-good, and something which is anti-beauty. Probably the trick will be, like now we are seeing in a lot of media representations, to show and to depict that people who are aging at different ages, they can have their own unique needs. They can live happily, and happiness has a different meaning altogether.
Mm.
It's not that j- again, it's not about that people who turn old, they don't need support. They need support in their own ways, but that doesn't make them any different, or that doesn't make them any more weaker compared to the other population.
Yeah, and also I think that, like you were saying, unlearning. There are new sort of courses, the small courses that LinkedIn does, and I was looking through those and going in through, and other platforms as well. And I think there are certain things now called microaggression, whether they be you are talking about microaggression in the context of racism or in the context of ageism. And I would like to share this, the screenshots that we were looking at. And in that, they were saying that jobs that advertise for recent college graduates or digital natives, it's not a very inclusive kind of narrative that should go in a job advert, but also like adorable grandparents. And what they were saying is that, adorable grandparents are, that's not a right term to use, because you can talk about an adorable puppy, but not an adorable grandparent. And when you're saying adorable grandparent, you're actually at the back of your mind meaning something else. Of course, that's in a very subconscious state, not intending to, but actually leading the way to that. And then older people are not always hard of hearing, and these are the kind of narratives. And then there was something else as well. We were going on to it, and as we saw at the very beginning, that I'm too old to learn all this new technology. And this was something that we have come across during the COVID-19 time. And we were saying, well, that digital literacy was actually at a very low level, particularly within the older population, which is wrong, because it's and we have seen people, it's not linked to the age, but it's basically linked to how you want to learn and unlearn things. So thank you very much for that. I think what we will also do now is to kind of take up the questions that has come through. So one of the question here is by Bitan Malik, and he is asking that, can poor mental health and stress advance aging in a person healthy otherwise? How to cope up with it? Can you hear us, Dr. Banerjee, or have we lost you there? I think we have lost Dr. Banerjee there. Is
Yeah.
it? You're there. Okay.
There, right? Yeah. Again, sorry for the disturbance.
No,
So thanks, Bitan. I think it's a really important question. I think you probably are asking if continuous stress or a poor state of mental health can accelerate aging, make the aging process fast. Now, see, aging is an extremely slow process, and it involves your biological, your psychological, and your social attributes. So to answer your question in one word, yes, it does. But what extent of stress will impair aging, to what extent, that depends, that's extremely individualized. So it depends on the personal threshold, on the level of your stress exposure, the stress threshold, and what type of stress you are undergoing, and of course family support. So for most of us, in general, human beings are amazingly resilient. But I'm sure that you're aware that, if a person stays in a chronic state of stress, it can affect your blood sugars, it can affect your thyroid, your BP may shoot up, and each of these, if uncontrolled, can affect your brain, can affect what is called as brain aging, and that can further lead to development of memory problems and other attributes much well in advance than what is expected. So yes, in a way it does, but again, as I said, lifestyle measures. So understanding what is good for you at what age, and so let's say the kind of diet that will be helpful for you or you can withstand at 2030s may not be the same after 50s. Also, there are certain exercise patterns, certain patterns of sleep requirements which change, along with age. Uh, Now, that is important to consider. While we discuss ageism, it is also important to understand that every age has its own requirements, and not following that will lead to harm to your body. So, that's equally important. Probably one of the aspects of combating ageism is also to understand what healthy aging means. And I'll just take this opportunity a minute, if I may, Dr. Lahiri. I think you had mentioned about how we portray older persons, in the last thing, this microaggression that you showed. To give you a very common example, whenever there is a logo, or when there is a, let's say, a black and white pictorial or an infographic where you have to represent older persons or an elderly couple, by default, if you actually search, or if you see the commonest ones which will appear even if you Google, it is either two people who are sitting, or two people who are bent and walking with sticks, or, as you said, somebody who is not able to hear properly or listen to properly. Now, that is how we represent what old is, that somebody should have one or the other defects, either should be alone, or should have a biological problem, or a physiological issue, or should have diabetes, or should have some physical ailments, or should be coughing, or should have hearing aid. So most of our senior citizens, if you actually give them the required support, they might just live, act, or talk like we are doing today. So that is where the narratives change, and probably that is where most of our understanding of ageism, uh, or our understanding of aging, can change. So in fact, one of the popular perceptions are that older persons usually, if you, as you were mentioning, adorable, so they are sweet, childlike, absent minded, comical, or different, the other part of it, so they're repulsive, feeble, they are not able to take care of their personal hygiene, irrational, out of touch with reality. So I think it's very important how the young people consume things like this, because over the period of time, it's important that we portray and discuss about older people, including the ones who are there in our family, as who are financially, physically, socially independent, and open minded, rather than showing somebody as physically weak, sexually dormant, doesn't need any other pleasures of life, close minded, and inefficient. Why I'm stressing on the part of sexuality is that relationships form a very important part of aging. And we should not forget at any point of time that what our needs are today, exactly the same needs can be fostered on our parents or grandparents, just in a different way. And if we do not consider, charity begins at home. So if we perpetuate ageism in the family, that just gets perpetuated globally to the world and to the society.
Yes, and we all need to take action. I quite like that, actually. I mean, it's right that, however ways the media kind of represent, if we can work at a micro level rather than thinking about the macro levels, then possibly it's more, it's more kind of a word of mouth or through social media, because now there are more user-generated content and we are living in that age. That's excellent. I've got the next question coming in. From Celebrate Our Similarities. Agree underrepresented voices not heard. In particular, women of color in now older age group have never had a seat on the table. This needs to be combined with young people voices. Do you think that can be a force for good change?
Yeah, of course. I think that is where we need to start. I think as I mentioned, that the best part of it is when people who have not been represented, or let's say we are talking about older people here. So if there is a discussion or a similar discussion on ageism or how to combat ageism, and people from all age groups, ethnicity, colors, diversity in the true sense are there, then probably that's what represents their voices best. And in fact, ironically, this word ageism was coined by Butler, one of the American gerontologists. And when he coined it, the major underpinnings behind this ageism were two: racism and sexism. So, in fact, if you see now, if these all can cumulatively affect. So, somebody who is above 60 and also of a certain ethnicity or of a certain color or of a certain gender, I mean, specifically women and being old, they are always in a state of double jeopardy. A sexual minority and old, increased problem. Somebody who is an ethnic minority and old, it just gets increased. So in fact, even when we were looking at the psychological problems in during the pandemic, and even the mortality in the pandemic in the western countries, we don't have data from the eastern countries yet. People who have these unique class-based vulnerabilities are at much increased risk of death or COVID-related complications than others. So why I state this is because this does not just affect you psychologically, but it can affect you in every single domain: your healthcare access, your priority, social welfare benefits, how much you are able to share your problems with others, and how much audience you have to your voices, and most importantly, how you perceive yourself. So as you say, who had never had a seat at the table, so when it is too long, a person tends to believe that probably I do not deserve a seat. So I think that's where you change it. You take a seat and you discuss your problems in a diverse population and an environment. And that's the dialogue of change. And probably that you chose this topic today itself is a wonderful beginning to that.
Thank you. Yeah, and linked to that is another comment. Agree, individual attitude plays a huge role, but needs resilience against cultural expectations for how to behave, look, dress, say, etc. That's interesting. So because what we were saying here is how you were saying the racism and sexism were the two basic areas that then contributed towards ageism. But there are also cultural expectations. Do you think that cultural expectation is linked to how people think in the East and how people think in the West, and or due to as a result of ethnicity, background? It's
Yeah,
a complex.
yeah, I mean, of course, it's a very complex interplay of multiple factors. Now, as you showed in your video, that somebody said that I have done a tattoo at an age of 50 years. Now, again, if you look at the popular perceptions, that is not how a person is expected to behave in certain cultures. Now every culture has their own norm of how a person of a certain gender and a certain age is supposed to behave. When we are discussing about ageism, there are a lot of anthropological perspectives come in. So how a society behaves, how a society expects the persons involved to behave, so on and so forth. Now, the point is not to talk against any norms, any social norms, any religion, any culture, any ethnicity, nothing. Each have their own rules. And we know that cultural expectations, demands, and dynamics, they will vary widely between the East and the West. But irrespective of, any any cultural connotations or socioeconomic strata or ethnicity or the social norms, each have a pervasive ageism, So the point is that at one place, you will see that the basic premise, we all are human beings, we all are afraid of dying, and we all kind of equate being aged with something which is negative. So that is there in every single culture. But what is interesting is, along with that, there are also numerous descriptions of how aging can bring about positive changes. That is also universal across cultures. So what I'm just trying to tell is that irrespective of which culture, which ethnicity, which country we are discussing it, now we are having a UK-India discussion, but irrespective of the countries on which sides of the table they are in a discussion, I think it's important to take, instead of those negative stereotypes, let's take the positive depictions of aging, and healthy aging practices in different cultures and assimilate them for the greater good. And that is not something that happens in a day. That happens over innumerable discussions, putting them into policies, papers, daily lives, practices, in cross-cultural talks, in, let's say, a lot of lessons being taught by the COVID pandemic. So any academic or non-academic forum of discussion, or whenever we are even writing and sharing our thoughts which are specific to a certain culture, it's important that we portray, both in media as well as in other forms, the positive aspects and the healthy aspects of aging. And over a period of time, these portrayals, these narratives have a huge potential to make the change. And this is a snowballed process. We do it today, we continue doing it. It's going to have a positive effect. It should have a positive effect.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. On that note, I will just like to, before we come back and end, we are almost towards the end of the show. There is a video actually where people are talking about their experiences of ageism. And I found that that's quite unique and useful as well. So let's play that.
I want to work and I need to work, but I have this additional thing to think about, which is my age when applying for a job.
In recruitment, they don't say, it's for this age to this age. And they don't really sort of show any discrimination with regards to a number. What they do is use words powerfully.
They're putting some fairly signs out there which aren't particularly subtle about they're looking for a younger person. You can tell that sometimes with the language.
They just use words like dynamic,
fast-paced,
recently qualified,
fun, energetic,
go-getting,
long hours.
You feel you're reading that advert and you go, no, you tell it's been written by a younger person and they're aiming for a younger person, and I'd probably discount that because I thought, what's the point in wasting my time?
You suddenly start to doubt your own ability and to doubt your worth, and you start thinking, well, would I ever get a job in this industry again? Because it doesn't look like it. And you don't really know where to go because you're being shut off at a very early stage with every application you make.
Again, one of the very
I think it's thanks for sharing this. I think this is this really speaks volumes as to how you can perpetuate ageism without really speaking about ageism per se, and how simple choice of words can change tides. And we were discussing this, ageism at workplace and at recruitment, and that is something which is probably very prominent in all sectors.
Yes, yeah, agree. And on that note, thank you very much again for joining us. And I think we will have to carry on this discussion in different forms. And if possible, we can do some webinars again to start with, but I think followed by some writing and all of that. But as you say, it will be really useful to kind of produce that counter narrative on the public domain. And here is another comment which says, great video. And then there is another comment from Cause which says that they have been actually working towards building mental wealth, which is a unique terminology that we have come across now. So yes, it's really nice to know that. Thank you very much. So thanks again for joining us, Dr. Banerjee, and I hope that you have your rest of the evening a little peaceful and doing some things, wrapping up or whatever you want to do. Are you at work today later or?
Yeah, no, I think as of now there's no work. So yeah, hopefully rest of the evening will be peaceful. Thank you so much for having me here, and thanks for choosing this pertinent topic. I'm sure that it will be helpful to many and will be one of our first steps in battling the social evil of ageism.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.